Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode, and I think I'm going to get through 5 questions today here on this episode. So going to dive into that. Everything from hypertrophy training, nutrition, everything in between there on that. But if you haven't yet, I have my free body recomp checklist. So if you're interested in learning more about a body recomp, what it is, how to do it, 10 things you need, why it's important, why body composition is important, some misconceptions around body recomposition, the 2 types of body recomp. So if you're interested in learning that and just getting a good base of knowledge around that free resources for you, the link to that is in the show notes there. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's question. So my first question for the day is, do you have a ceiling for percentage of calories for fat during a maintenance/build phase? 2 things. First, I don't do percentages. I don't like to do percentages. You typically basing our macro numbers off of your overall caloric intake. And then where's that at? Like we need to figure out what that is. And then from there, I like to do these numbers more so based off of body weight. So for example, the next thing I'm going to set is going to be protein. So that's going to be based off of body weight and potentially body fat percentage, depending on where you're at. And then for fats, I'm more so just looking for a minimum. And then let carbs and fats fall where they need to, so long as you're hitting a minimum there. The first 2 things that we really want to dial in is going to be our overall intake in terms of calories and then protein. And then some people think that this is the right way to do it. Some people don't. I don't think we need to overly stress exact fat and carb intake there. So I'll give you some numbers in terms of fats, what I think this could look like, and then we'll go from there. So again, I don't have a set number, right? Because if we take calories and protein, you're already somewhat limited in how many fats you can get there, right? So that's going to automatically limit that because at some extent, you can't just continue to eat more and more fats. So you are going to be capped at some point. Plus, in these phases, when we're talking a phase where we're not in a fat loss phase, in most cases, I would like to see carbohydrates be at a minimum as well too, right? That minimum is going to be around 1 gram per pound of body weight. And obviously in many cases, it's going to end up being a lot higher than that. So again, we're also now capping fat numbers. Okay. And so just with this, I'm in this particular situation so again, I'm more concerned about your protein amount and your calorie amount, making sure that's where we need it to be. Plus looking at a client's food choices through their food log and making sure they are getting good carb sources and good fat sources in their diet versus exact fat in carb numbers. Okay. So I'm much more concerned about where are these food choices coming from, because the biggest thing that I see is when people just track their calories and macros, they get so focused on these numbers and then they're not really focused on the quality of nutrition that they're getting in, right? For example, with fats, it ends up being a lot of saturated fat. It ends up being a lot of fat from things that in carbohydrate sources, more processed type sources, right? But I want to make sure that when we look at fats, we're getting it, fats and carbs. I want to make sure we're getting it from sources that are going to lead to good diet quality, a good blend of it, right? We don't obviously need to make sure everything is quote unquote clean, but we just want to make sure that they have good sources. So when we look at fats, I'm looking at things like, are you getting it from avocados? Are you getting it from fish? Are you getting it from nuts and seeds, olive oil, right? These are things that ideally we're getting a lot of our fats from. If we look, and a lot of your fats are coming from things like, again, hey, I have 3,000 calories to work with. Now I can fit in like ice cream and cookies and stuff like that. And then that's where we start to run into some potential issues from a diet quality standpoint. Again, you can make it work if you're tracking your calories and macros, but we just want to be careful with too much coming from those sources. So that's what I'm looking at. And then from carb standpoint, I want to look at, hey, is it coming from fruit? Is it coming from veggie? Are you getting things like potatoes, sweet potatoes, rice, quinoa, stuff like that, right? Higher quality carbohydrate sources versus, again, just getting it like trying to fit your macros and putting in a bunch of pizza. And again, we want to fit those things in, but we need a good base of quality nutrient dense foods there. So I'm more concerned about that and making sure that's in check. Okay. And typically when I do, that's going to naturally kind of line these calories and macros up, or the macros from a fat and carb perspective where we need them. Because the only time that I would say you really need to be hyper specific on your macros on like fats and carbs on top of protein is if you're like have a really high output in terms of training. So you need to have higher carbohydrate intake. You have really like high physique type goals, and most people don't fall within that. So we can be a little bit more flexible here with our exact numbers. And saying this, I have those minimums. From a fat perspective, I want that minimum to be about 30-ish grams per day, give or take, plus or minus 10 grams per day. That's ideally where we would be from a fat minimum. And now if we break this whole thing down, we figure out calories, then we figure out protein. We have these minimums from a fat and carb perspective. Then we can let things fall where they need to. Again, more so concerned with where the sources are coming from And then what we do from there is we figure out, okay, are you performing well? If you're not, maybe we need to look at altering our carbohydrate intake a bit and go a little bit higher. Is your recovery good? If it's not, maybe we need to go a little bit higher carbohydrate. So that's how I would typically do that. What I will say is from a high end perspective, again, somebody who moves decent amount, they have body comp goals, wanting to add some muscle, I would say I'm capping fats probably between 100 and 120 grams per day, just generally speaking, because when that happens, it's like when you take most people's caloric intake, you take their protein, the minimum carbs I want to hit, that's where you're going to end up being essentially there. Plus, again, I do find that the higher people's fat intake gets, the more now we're getting it from those sources, the not great sources earlier. And again, this isn't me fear mongering around saturated fat. Like you do need to get some, we want to get some, but it's just we need to have a good balance of fat sources there. All right, next question. And somebody asked this through YouTube. Is 3 to 10 sets enough for me to build muscle? And I totally think it can be. Now, I'm definitely with this 3 to 10 sets per muscle group per week. Like we probably want to be on the higher end of this. 3 sets per week of everything. You're probably looking more at maintenance there. So again, this probably would be, I think maybe I said it on a podcast, 3 to 10 sets. We're probably looking at 6 to 10 sets per muscle group per week to actually grow as a minimum. Anything under that, you're probably just maintaining, which is not necessarily a bad thing for some people, right? So we definitely want to be on the higher end of this 3 to 10 sets number that I gave. But if we dial in quality, so again, we're looking at exercise selection, training close to failure, good execution and technique. This to me is going to be more than enough for people to grow, right? The problem becomes when people want to do more, it's from a lack of the execution side of things, right? Poor exercise selection, not training close enough to failure because they're doing a lot of like high rep stuff. And then the technique and execution's not there, right? We're not putting attention on the target muscle. It's just all about feeling the burn and that type of feeling, right? So I think if we can dial in that quality, 6 to 10 sets per week is going to be more than enough. However, I do think it makes sense to do more if you have the time, you can recover, and it makes sense. Okay. So really my whole point with this is like you can get away with a lot less than you think, but if you can do more and your quality stays there, based on the research, there's probably no downside. It's probably a good idea if you really want to build muscle and build certain muscle groups to go higher than this if you can. The problem becomes now we face recovery limitations, we face time constraints in most people, right? If you're a bodybuilder and you want to maximize muscle growth and this is all you do, again, you're probably going to be doing more than 6 to 10 sets per week on muscle groups, at least a couple muscle groups per week, maybe, or yeah, in certain phases. I do think there is that. And Greg Knuckles just wrote an article here where basically it looks like around up to 25 sets is something you can do. But again, before people now try and go to that, the goal is to not just do more. We don't just want to do high volumes for the sake of it. We need to make sure quality's there. We need to make sure we can recover from it. And we need to make sure that you have the time and it makes sense for you to do it because there is going to be some diminishing returns here on this. Whereas as you continue to get past 10 sets per week, you will probably grow more muscle, but now it comes at like slower progress. It's going to come at a higher recovery cost. It's going to come at more time that you need to spend doing that. And again, does that make sense for you specifically? Really, there's a ton of different ways we can do this, right? Like you could be at 6 to 10 sets, really work on that. Like you're on everything, on all your muscle groups. And that's going to free up time maybe for you to focus on other things. And you're still going to build a good amount of muscle. And that's going to be at also the peak of the less time commitment to it. But you could also do it where you have 1 to 3 muscle groups, go higher than this for periods of time. And that's also going to come at not necessarily a huge time cost either, right? And a huge recovery cost depending on the muscle group, right? So there are things that we can do to work around this and we can potentially go higher on certain muscle groups if we feel like you need it or you want to do it for certain muscle groups there. But when we look at the levers we can pull, it's really going to come from a frequency standpoint as how many sets we do per week and then an intensity standpoint. And the big thing being you can't just maximize all of them, right? You can't do as many sets as possible with as high intensity as possible with the highest amount of frequency, right? There's going to be some give and take here where the higher your intensity is, you can get away with less. The lower your intensity is, the more you can do, right? And that's also going to play into frequency where if you're trying to train a muscle group 4 times per week, you're probably not going to be able to do the max amount of sets per workout. You're probably not going to be able to do the max amount of intensity either, right? So all these things, like you can increase one and you might have to decrease another. I always bring it back to creating a player in a video game, whether that be from a sports perspective or just like if you want to really increase an attribute in one thing, you have to decrease it elsewhere, right? You can't just max everything out. Otherwise, everybody would do that, and that would be the way to go. But unfortunately, we can't do that. So again, I think 3 to 10 sets is totally enough. If you're on the lower end of that, you're probably closer to maintenance. On the higher end of the, say, 6 to 10 sets, and you have the execution dialed in, the exercise selection, the programming, that's going to be more than enough. And then from there, it really just comes down to, do you want to put the time into it? Does it make sense for you to do more? And there's, again, multiple ways that we can go about that. So a client brought this up, and I thought this was a great question to go over. They mentioned they weren't getting sore in their workouts. Is this a problem? And definitely not at all. Again, soreness is not a sign of muscle growth. I think a lot of people assume that in order to make progress with fitness stuff, it has to be this like super challenging thing. You have to be super sore. It's got to be like the most, you just have to run yourself into the ground, and that's how you make progress. And again, that's not the case, right? So it's not bad, but it's not necessarily a good thing either, right? There's some context to this, so we need to go into it a bit more. So too much soreness, okay? So if you're super sore, this is all on like a sliding scale. If we get to the point to where you can't do anything and you can't move out of bed, that's not good, right? You probably did way too much, and there's could be some health things that could go on, right? Rhabdo comes to mind. If anyone's curious what rhabdo is, look it up. I think it's RHABDO, I think is how you spell it. Not good. We want to avoid that. But I think that's fine if you do that every once in a while. But we can't be doing that all the time. If we're always doing that and you're getting to that point, we're likely under recovering and we're training hard, and there's some recovery thing that needs to be better. We need to improve our training methods, but you're likely not going to be building a ton of muscle if you're just constantly sore all the time there. That's that end of the spectrum. However, no soreness, again, it's not good or bad. Like, just because now you don't get any soreness doesn't mean it's necessarily good, or it doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. What I would want to know is, I'd want to dive a little bit deeper. Are you progressing? Are you training close to failure? How much are you doing? We would look at that. If you're progressing, you're training close to failure, you're hitting that 6 to 10 sets kind of threshold that we're talking about here, you're probably like, and you're not getting sore. I'm more concerned about those things. Like, you're going to probably build more muscle than someone who is constantly getting sore and not doing those things there. And saying that, if you're not getting sore at all, that is a sign that, hey, could we push training a little bit more? Could we do a little bit more overall? Those would be things that I would be looking at there. Like, it's just a sign that maybe we can do a little bit more. But in saying that, certain things, you could do this where you could make yourself sore, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're building muscle, right? Like, things that will make you sore, you could go do a new exercise that you haven't done before. Again, that not necessarily, so just doing a new exercise because it's novel. I'm sure anyone who's done new exercises knows that you can get super sore from that. Large increases in the amount of volume or intensity that you've typically done. So if it's like you do a new exercise, you also did 0 sets of any sort of training, and now you go into 4 sets and you do a lot of weight, you're going to be pretty freaking sore. Is that a sign that you're built? Does that amount of soreness you get scale with how much muscle growth you're going to have from that? No, not at all. And then another thing that we can get that can make us sore is like spending extra time in the eccentric, like the lowering portion, or exercises that have that are really challenging in that eccentric, or in the lengthened position. Looking at a face away cable curl at the bottom, right? Looking at a Romanian deadlift at the bottom, right? You're in that stretched position. It has a large lengthened bias aspect to it, and you spend a lot of time in that eccentric, and you can get super sore there. So again, not necessarily a sign that we are. And then you can take this to the extreme of soreness being some sort of injury, right? And it's like, yeah, you're sore, but does that mean you're building muscle? No. So there's that. And then we do have the repeated bout effect, where your body will obviously adapts, and things become less damaging the more times you do them, right? And so I just want to bring up the repeated bout effect there. So with that, like, we're not aiming for soreness in our training sessions, but too much in the short term, not necessarily a bad thing. We just don't want to do that all the time. No soreness, again, not good or bad. We could potentially do more, but if you're progressing, training close to failure, and you're doing, again, that at least that 6 to 10 or more, to me, you're in a good spot there from that perspective. Okay, so next question is thoughts on volume eating / packing out meals with tons of veggies, any negative impact. So I think generally speaking, most people need to increase the food volume in their diet. So when we look at food volume, this is the amount of food you get for how many calories, right? Let's take, on the extreme example, let's take olive oil versus broccoli, right? Olive oil is very calorically dense because it's not a lot of volume. It's not a lot of actual food mass, but you get a lot of calories. And then you take broccoli, where it's a large food mass, right? Like, you're getting a good amount of actual mass, but it doesn't come with a lot of calories. So to me, that's calorie dense versus like more volume type eating. And then there's obviously everything in between there, right? Like, volume eating isn't necessarily just veggies. That is part of it, because veggies are very high food volume type foods, but that's kind of food volume 101 there. And I think this is most people need to increase the food volume in their diet, right? Even people that track calories and macros, and they've been doing it for a while, I find that their overall food volume is low. And this is where they get themselves into trouble in fat loss phases, and even outside of fat loss phases where food volume is super low. Yes, they're tracking calories and macros, but now they're like super hungry, cravings are super high, and it's hard to manage their caloric intake. And that's anytime they're around food, that's where it can be super challenging to stick with it. So most people do need to increase their food volume. In saying that, there also is a subset of people that overdo food volume. Okay. And this can be an issue if it leads to you under eating calories for your goal. Okay. So the times when this would be more likely to happen would be someone who's just very body comp focused. They're on the leaner side. They freak out over any amount of scale weight increase, and they want to keep this like super lean physique all year long, and they're scared to consume calories. They again, just, hey, I need to eat super high quality foods all the time. I can't ever eat anything that's not a quote unquote diet food. That's where I see it become an issue. And these people tend to underconsume calories long term and they have a artificially low maintenance caloric intake because they're consuming low amounts of calories because they think they need to eat this way all the time. And so that's where it's an issue, is if it leads to under eating calories, which can definitely do that because it's super filling. If you tell someone that eats really high food volume all the time, hey, let's increase your calories to 2000, the biggest thing that I hear them say is, that's just so much food. There's no way I can do that. Yeah, if you're literally trying to eat it all through veggies and fruit, like it's going to be hard to get to 2000 calories. We need to increase the calorie density in your diet to get there. And the big thing is too much fiber and super high food volume can impact gut health, especially when you try and get to these higher amounts of calories. And if you combine that with someone who has high stress in general, high stress load on the body, high physiological or psychological stress, they have high training output. If you're doing this high food volume on top of it, not only are they not consuming enough calories, but now they just have all this like food volume in their stomach, and this can lead to gut issues. So again, this is the person that has these issues, even though they quote unquote eat clean all the time, which again, if you listen to this podcast, I would say it's a larger percentage of people. When we talk the general population of everyone, it's a very small amount. But when we zoom in and look at the fitness industry and people who are into fitness, into health and fitness, and then like that's where these types of people start to make up a larger percentage. But in general, even people that are into their fitness, like most people can increase their food volume. But so generally speaking, it's not going to be an issue. More people need to do it, but it can become an issue if that's the case and it leads to you under consuming calories. And I've definitely seen that happen before. And again, I'm sure somebody who listens to this can relate to that and has felt this way before there. So yeah, that's what I think about volume eating. Again, it's very context dependent, but more people need to eat higher food volumes for sure. And just with anything, too much of anything can become an issue at some point. All right. So constant bloat / swollen lower stomach, no food intolerances, any advice? First question would be, how do you know you don't have any food intolerances? I'm assuming you're just basing that off of, I don't know if you did like a test or what. I would just be curious to know how you know for sure you don't have food intolerances. I'm not saying you need to get like a test or anything, but I just want to know, because if you are getting some constant bloat, swollen lower stomach, that could be a sign that you do have some food intolerances potentially. But in saying that, again, when new clients come to me and this is the issue that they have, there's a couple things I see. First, this leads to people thinking they need to get a ton of tests. They need to get on a bunch of supplements. They need to cut out a bunch of foods, and they spend thousands of dollars to do this. And then they think something's wrong with them. They think, but really we need to look at your overall lifestyle, your training, food choices, what that looks like. And we need to start there first before we dive into these things. Because again, that could totally be the case, but I just see people jump to that. And if you go to a gut health specialist or something like that, I feel like and if this happens and you go to them and next thing you know, you're spending thousands of dollars a month on some sort of protocol, supplements, stuff like that. I just hate to see that. I just feel like that happens a lot. And there's a lot of things that we can work on before we have to do that. Because again, a lot of people, just because you train and you track your calories and macros doesn't mean that you're like, everything is dialed in. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit things that I see happen. So there's that. But then I also, something we want to look at. And then, but again, like really the big thing being is we need to work on these habits. And these are things that if client comes to me and they're experiencing this, these are the things that we're going to be working on. And by working on these things, it's a great overall health thing as well too, right? Because I feel like anytime we have gut issues, there's something along the lines of your lifestyle or training or something like that is off that needs to be dialed in. And in turn, by doing that, everything else is going to improve, body composition, etc. But the gut is huge and it impacts a lot of things. And it can definitely be something that, again, if it's off, it's probably going to impact your ability to improve your body composition and feel your best as well too. So I think these things are super important. So some things that I'm generally looking at and working on, and these are just general digestion, gut health basics. First, we need to manage overall stress load on the body. Again, this is something that it's not just, hey, I feel stress. It's overall stress load on the body. So we have to look at other things, right? Again, you're a low, super lean, calorie deficit that's a stressor on the body. High training output, that's a stressor on the body. And again, these one stressor by itself isn't going to be anything. It's when you have multiple ones where things are going to start to add up there. And when that gets too high, this can lead to some gut issues as well too. But again, overall, like a lot of people who do have high stress kind of lifestyles, like they almost get accustomed to that and they don't realize it's, oh, I'm not stressed. Again, this would be a huge thing that I'm looking at. And 9 times out of 10, there's something that we can do to take some to lower your overall stress load on the body and or improve your stress resilience as well too in combination with that. That comes down to improving your stress resilience comes down to the right dose and not overdoing it. And that's where a lot of people struggle with there, right? It's like you kind of have two ends of the spectrum here. It's like people don't train at all. Again, that's a stressor on the body. And then you have people who do train, they love it, and they overdo it all the time, right? And there's literally no in between. And it's probably better to be in that in between there, especially if you're experiencing these issues. Sleep and circadian health. Again, this is something that many people have low-hanging fruit things that they can dial in. So right off the bat here, I guarantee you, if I were to like do an audit into your day, there's at least 2 to 3 things in these first 2 things that can be improved. And you'll probably see some improvement in these symptoms before having to spend thousands of dollars on supplements. Managing alcohol, these first 3 things, again, there's always going to be something here. So with alcohol, it's not that we want to avoid it completely. It's just if you're experiencing these issues and you consume alcohol, like we need to have an honest conversation about, okay, do we need to dial back what you're doing? Do we need to abstain altogether? Because alcohol is going to be it's a huge stressor on the gut there. Slowing down when eating and chewing your food fully, right? And eating at meals at a table without doing other things. Again, if we look here, most people are going to eat super quick, not slow down, and they're going to eat distracted. So again, we want to look at that. Manage your training load relative to your caloric intake and overall stress load on the body. So again, you look at someone who they're super healthy, they train a lot, they have this high stress load on their body, but then they also try to do a ton of training output on top of it. And they also consume low amounts of calories without. This could lead to some gut issues. So we need to look into that. We want to make sure we get enough movement, a ton of movement, but enough movement. If we're not doing that throughout the day, that could lead to some gut issues, and we need to look at that there. We want to stay hydrated. And again, we're not just talking about slamming down water, but we want to stay hydrated overall. And again, we want to look at food quality, right? Too much food volume can be an issue, but then also too much highly processed foods can be an issue there. So again, I'm always going to start here with clients. More times than not, there's at least 1 to 2 things that could be improved, and they see improved digestion and gut health. Now, if you do these things for 4, 8, 12 weeks and things don't improve, then further intervention may be needed, right? Supplementation, food elimination. But most times something here needs to be worked on before you have to take further action and get into a much more intense intervention, being testing, supplement protocol, food elimination, things like that. So hopefully that was helpful there and gives you some good gut health basics there. Because again, if it's off, like there's a sign that something needs to be worked on there. And again, gut health being bloating, pain, constipation, going too much, right? It's not just, hey, I'm constipated, I didn't go to the bathroom 1 day a week there. All right, so that's it for this episode. I hope this was helpful. If you guys found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, that will help more people find it. And then if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media. So if you have any questions on this podcast or any of my other episodes or anything in general, just reach out to me there. I look forward to connecting with you. That's it for this episode. Talk soon.